What's up, y'all? This is Ace. This is Fantasize Football, and I'm here today to bring y'all part 4 in the 5-part series, 5 things I'm excited about for fantasy football in 2021. If you missed out on any of the previous entries into the series, go check them out. If you've seen them, you liked them, let me know. Leave some comments, give me some feedback. I really appreciate it. But today, we're here to do part 4. And what are we going to be talking about today, you may ask yourself. And let me answer that for you. Today, we're going to be talking about the rookie wide receivers of last year that already broke out. Will they break out further, or will they fall off a little bit in year 2? I'm going to be talking about 3 guys in specific today. Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys, and Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers, and what I think about these 3 guys in particular. Now, right now we got NFL free agency going on. A lot of stuff happening day in and day out. We got March Madness going on as well. But then you got your boy here, busting his ass, talking my shit about fantasy football months and months and months before the season. So if you've listened to any of the previous videos, if you like what you're hearing, once again, comment, like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel. It all really helps, and I really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get right into it. All right. So the first guy we're going to be talking about is Justin Jefferson. Now, as you all know, or if you didn't know, if you're living under a rock, if you took a year off from fantasy last year with COVID, whatever, you weren't following the NFL too much, Justin Jefferson had a legendary rookie season. My man was a beast. And to be honest with you, I think that he has the potential to break out further in year 2. So, real quick, let's talk about 2020. In 2020, Jefferson played all 16 games. He had 125 targets, 88 catches, 1,400 yards, and 7 touchdowns, a 70% catch rate, and 11.2 yards per target. Now, the Vikings threw the ball 516 times in 2020, and in 2019, 466 times, for an average of 491 attempts per season. Now, the Vikings are a run-first team with Dalvin Cook, but they did show a little increase in the pass volume last year. So let's go ahead and take that 491 attempt average for the past couple of years, multiply that by a 5% increase. You're looking at 515 attempts. I think this is pretty safe. You know, they got a new OC last year. Also, they weren't as good as they have been in past years. So, in turn, they ended up throwing the ball a little more, and I think that trend will kind of continue. So, let's use that 515 attempts to be safe. Could be a little more, could be a little less, but I think it's a fair number to go by. So, last year, Justin Jefferson had a 24% target share, but he took off after week 3. That's when he really started to get it going. And from week 3 on, he had 119 targets, 83 catches, 1,330 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Now, for a 16-game pace, that's 136 targets, 95 catches, 1,520 yards, and 8 touchdowns, and a 26% target share based on the 2020 516 attempts that the Vikings had in the passing game. So, now let's think about this a little bit. Adam Thielen's a year older. Justin Jefferson's got a whole year under his belt in the offense. So, I think it's safe to assume that he could take on a little bit larger of a target share. So, like we were saying, last year, he had a 26% target share from weeks 3 on. So, let's just say that jumps up to 28%, which is an 8% increase at 515 pass attempts. That's 144 targets. Now, let's also consider that he has just a slight increase in efficiency with a full year in the offense, more comfortable with Kirk Cousins. He's got an offseason to work with him, whatnot. All right, so 70% catch rate in 2020. We're going to increase that to 71.5%, which is just a 2% increase, because I do expect slightly more volume. So you would kind of think, you know, maybe a little decrease in efficiency, but going from year 1 to year 2, I do think he will be slightly more efficient. Could be around the same, but that's why I just did a 2% increase, just a slight jump in the efficiency department. So with that in mind, a 71.5% catch rate with 144 targets is 103 catches. So, like I had mentioned, with a little more volume, there may be a little dip in efficiency. So this is where I put that in. Even with a slight dip in yards per target with the volume, right? 11.2 in 2020. We're going to bring that down to 10.9, which is a 3% decrease. With that 3% decrease in mind, we're looking at 1,570 yards. Now, Justin Jefferson scored all of his touchdowns from week 3 on. He had 7 touchdowns on 119 targets in 2020, which is a 6% touchdown rate. Now, let's just say that stays the same. That's going to be 9 touchdowns. He had 10 targets inside the 20, 8 of which came inside the 10, for an 17.9% target share. And he had 4 catches, 40% catch rate, resulting in 3 touchdowns. So I would expect a slight increase in red zone usage, and let me explain why. Again, like I mentioned before, a whole nother year in the offense. But on top of that, Adam Thielen was incredible in the red zone last year. It felt like on every drive when they got down there, Adam Thielen was wide open. So he hogged a lot of red zone targets, and never in Adam Thielen's career before had he scored double-digit touchdowns, let alone 14. So I expect to see some regression there, and I think Justin Jefferson will pick up the slack a bit there. So, with that in mind, 4 touchdowns outside of the red zone is something else. Expect for him because that's what he did last year. He can create for himself, whether he gets open, on a vertical route or he breaks a slant for a touchdown, whatever it is. I do expect a little bit more. You also factor in a little more red zone usage. Give him another 2 of those touchdowns around there. You're looking at a potential stat line of 2021 of 144 targets, 103 catches, 1,570 yards, and 9 touchdowns, which is a pretty significant improvement over his 2020 stats of 125 targets, 88 receptions, 1,400 yards, and 7 touchdowns. All right, so now that we got Justin Jefferson out of the way, let's move on to number 2, and that's CeeDee Lamb. Now, CeeDee Lamb also had a good season, but I do think that he will also break out further. Now, let's talk about 2020 a little bit. 2020, he played 16 games. He had 111 targets, 74 catches, 935 yards, 5 touchdowns, 67% catch rate at 8.4 yards per target. Now, the Cowboys threw the ball 639 times in 2020 and 597 times in 2019 for an average of 616 attempts per season. Now, CD had a 17% target share in 2020, but I do believe that he'll command a bit more targets. So with that in mind, we're going to use an 8% increase, the same thing I used for Justin Jefferson. That 17% target share is going to go up to 18.5%. So we're going to take those 616 pass attempts and 18.5% target share. That's 114 targets. Now, one thing we got to keep in mind with CeeDee Lamb is that Dak's coming back. They re-signed Dak. Hopefully he's going to be fully healthy. It looks like the surgery went great. He's good to go. So with Dak back around, I expect an increase in the efficiency for CeeDee Lamb. So he had a 67% catch rate in 2020. This year, I'm going to give him a 5% increase. We're going to be looking at a 70% catch rate. So we're going to take that 114 targets, 70% catch rate. You're looking at 80 catches. So I'm also going to slightly increase his yards per target with Dak instead of Dalton because that's something I wouldn't figure would improve. So we had 8.4 yards per target in 2020. We'll give it a slight 7% increase from 8.4 yards per target to 9 yards per target. 114 targets, 1,026 yards. Now let's talk about the touchdowns a little bit. And I feel like I should mention this. Touchdowns are a really hard metric to project, so bear with me. I'm going to do my best here. 5 touchdowns on 111 targets in 2020, a 4.5% touchdown rate. And that was with Dalton as well. And this is something that I really expect to increase because I think the offense is obviously going to be much better with Dak. So I'm going to give him a 10% increase from 4.5% to 4.9%. That's going to result in 6 touchdowns. 10 targets last year he had came in the red zone, 6 of which were inside the 10-yard line, resulting in 2 touchdowns, which is likely to increase with Dak. Because when you're in the red zone, you got a good quarterback, you're going to be more successful. So that would be, let's assume he gets 12 red zone targets, that would be 3 touchdowns, a little better touchdown rate. Let's give him one more, that's 4. He scored 3 touchdowns out of the red zone last year as well. So I'm going to give him the same number again this year, assuming that's the case. So that will give us a potential stat line for 2021 of 114 targets, 80 catches, 1,026 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which again, pretty significant improvement from his 2020 stats of 111 targets, 74 catches, 935 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Now last but not least, we're going to talk about Brandon Aiyuk. And this is where I might catch some flack. I might get some hate for this one. But I'm going to be honest, I just don't see it as much with Aiyuk. I know a lot of people like the guy, and I think he's very talented. But this is more of a situational thing than an actual player. So let's talk about Brandon Aiyuk now. 2020, he had 12 games played. He had 96 targets, 60 catches, 748 yards, and 5 touchdowns, a 62.5% catch rate at 7.8 yards per target, which at a 16-game pace is 128 targets, 80 catches, 997 yards, and 7 touchdowns. 49ers in 2020 threw the ball 570 of 1,046 plays. 2019, they threw the ball 478 times out of 1,012 plays, an average of 515 pass attempts over 19 and 20. Now, last year, they had a bad season. They were playing from behind a lot. The defense was banged up. They needed to pass the ball more. So, in the 12 games that Aiyuk played, they threw the ball 429 times. He had 96 targets. That's a 22% target share. Now, like I just mentioned, the defense should be better, so they're not going to be throwing the ball as much, as evidenced by 2019, where they ran the ball on 53% of their plays. Only 47% of their plays were pass plays. Now, on top of that, George Kittle and Deebo Samuel should both be healthy going into 2020, resulting in closer to those 2019 stats for the 49ers as a whole. I'm assuming they're going to want to run the ball more, control the pace of the game. That's kind of how they like to play in a perfect world, and I do expect them to be better. So, let's talk about Kittle. Kittle was out for the majority of 2020, okay? There were 6 games that George Kittle and Brandon Aiyuk played together, weeks 4 through 8 and week 16. So I'm going to give you the splits for Brandon Aiyuk in that period of time. So, in those games, those 5 games where he played with George Kittle, he had 33 targets, 22 catches, 295 yards, and 2 touchdowns, which is a 16-game pace of 88 targets, 59 catches, 787 yards, and 5 touchdowns, with a 67% catch rate at 8.9 yards per target. Now, in those weeks with Kittle, there were 239 pass attempts by the 49ers. Aiyuk had 33 targets, resulting in a 14% target share. Now, what you'll notice there is that Aiyuk was, in fact, more efficient with Kittle, but he did have significantly less volume. And why is that? It's because Kittle is obviously the number one option when he is healthy. That's been the case for the majority of George Kittle's career. He's been the number one option. So I would expect something similar with lower overall passing volume, because I do expect them to be better. Now, let's move from George Kittle to talking a little bit about Jimmy Garoppolo and how that affects Brandon Aiyuk. I do expect Jimmy Garoppolo to be the starting quarterback. I have heard some rumors of a trade, maybe them trying to either move up in the draft or grab someone where they're at, trade for someone, whatever. But as of right now, I'm going to assume Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the quarterback. So I do expect this, just like Kittle, will help with Brandon Aiyuk's efficiency, not exactly the volume. Again, that's going to have more to do with how the team's playing. If they're bad, they are going to have more pass volume. But if they are closer to 2020, and I don't think they're going to be a Super Bowl contender like they were, closer to 2019 like they were in 2019, I don't expect them to be a Super Bowl contender. But with that in mind, let's just talk about the splits with Jimmy Garoppolo. So, with Jimmy G, he played Brandon Aiyuk 5 games, weeks 2 and weeks 5 through 8. In those 5 games, he had 29 targets, 21 catches, 283 yards, and 2 touchdowns, which is a 16-game pace of 93 targets, 67 catches, 906 yards, and 6 touchdowns, 72% catch rate, and 9.8 yards per target. He was a lot more efficient when Jimmy Garoppolo was out there, but again, the volume just wasn't there. So, back to what I was saying before. Kittle and Deebo are both going to be back and hopefully healthy. So I'm going to go ahead and assume a middling target share of that 22% target share he held without Kittle and the 14% with Kittle, which is an average of 18%. Now we're also going to have a lower pass volume, and we're going to assume an average of 515 pass attempts, which again could be less, it could be more, but I think this is a safe middle ground just to use for the sake of what I'm saying here for my argument. So, with that increased efficiency, we're going to use a 70% catch rate. He had a 72% catch rate with Garoppolo in the 5 games he played, and a 67% catch rate with Kittle in the 6 games they played together. So I just went right in the middle at 70%. And 9.4 yards per target, which he had 9.8 yards per target with Jimmy G, and he had 8.9 yards per target with Kittle there. Again, right in the middle. So we're going to take those 515 attempts, use an 18% target share, That's 93 targets. 93 targets, 70% catch rate. That's 65 catches. 93 targets, 9.4 yards per target, 874 yards. Now, let's talk about the touchdowns a little bit. This is a tough one with Aiyuk, but bear with me. He had 14 red zone targets last year, 10 of which came inside the 10-yard line. He had 9 catches and 5 touchdowns. So all of his touchdowns were scored inside the red zone. I do assume there's going to be a lesser opportunity with him. With a healthy George Kittle, Deebo Samuel will be involved there. And if they add anyone, whatever, that's going to affect it as well. So he did have a 35% conversion rate. I'm going to give him 2 extra touchdowns out of the red zone because I do see him as a good playmaker. And just like Jefferson and Lamb, I could see him taking a slant to the house at any time, breaking off for a vertical. But with all that being said, with all that in mind, his projected stat line is 93 targets, 65 catches, 874 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which is actually a lot closer to what he did in the 12 games he played last year than his 16-game pace was. And the reason why I say all this, just to recap, I know I said this all, but I do want to put it out there, defend myself a little bit for the Aiyuk truthers out there. It's not because of a lack of talent. I think it's more because George Kittle's going to be the number 1 overall option. He's going to have to deal with Deebo Samuel as well. And although I do think that he could usurp Deebo as the true number 1 receiver, he's not going to be the number 1 option as long as George Kittle's there. I also think the 49ers offense is going to be better. I think their defense will be better with everyone back and healthy. So I just think they're going to play at a slow pace and try to run the ball more. With all that in mind, though, I do think Aiyuk's a tremendously talented player, and I do think he has value. I just think that with less overall volume in the offense and less opportunity for Aiyuk, he's better viewed as a wide receiver 3 flex play. So just keep that in mind for fantasy drafts in 2021. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. That's all I got for you today. We're going to wrap it up here. Keep your eyes out for Pop 5. And if you're liking the content, if you like this video, if you liked any of the other videos, give me a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you like, what you didn't like, what I should change, what you'd like to hear me talking about in the future. Share the video to your social media platforms, to your friends, to your family, to your grandma, to your teacher, whoever. It doesn't matter. I really, really appreciate it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel if you're loving it. It really, really helps. We got more coming for you guys. Pop 5's on the way. After that, I got something really cool I want to do where I'm going to do a rapid reaction to all the big signings and free agency and what I think they mean for fantasy in 2021. So with all that said, like, comment, share, subscribe, turn them notifications on. I hope y'all loving the content. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Peace.